Welcome, everyone, to Building and Leading After Crisis, a part of the Navigating Change series. I'm Jennifer Epps-Addison, and today I am going to be joined by some of the most dynamic, impactful leaders I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. Angela Lang, the Executive Director of Black Leaders Organizing Communities, or BLOC, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Maya Neal, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Civic Power Table. And Markasa Harris-Tucker, the Executive Director of the African American Roundtable. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to dive right in because I already know I'm not going to get enough time with you. Each of you have built your organizations and led them through transformative crisis. You've emerged stronger and even more impactful in their wake. So I want to dive into some of those remarkable journeys now. All of you essentially founders, even though there may have been some organizing legacy that your work builds upon, the organizations that you've built are now distinct, have marked differences from their predecessors, and are really built in a foundation that's rooted in your values and the values you bring into the world. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the context that your organization was founded in. And then what is your North Star or your mission? Why do your organizations exist? Markasa, would you mind if I started with you?
Hey, y'all. Thanks, Jen, for having us on. And yeah, I'm super excited to be present with these amazing leaders that I have the privilege of getting to lead alongside. The roundtable. What's so awesome is that everybody on this call has been a part of the iterations of the roundtable that I myself got a chance to walk into in 2014. It had already started in 2012 when some Black folks in Milwaukee decided that they wanted money to flow through Black organizations very specifically. Ended up getting a little money when the Scott Walker, one of our previous governors, was being recalled. And that was the beginning of it. Beautiful Black leaders came together, made something happen, and the table stayed engaged around, I would say, continuous support and engagement. I often describe the roundtable as like this loose body, this loose table that was like supporting one organization if they had a press conference, signing on to something. And then I came in 2014 as an office manager at a different organization where the roundtable was and eventually moved to. The roundtable has kind of moved around from organization to organization and found its home, which is a whole nother story, right where we are now in Milwaukee as its own org. And at some point along the journey, it had switched some co-chairs. Actually, Angela was a co-chair for a moment alongside Rosalind Wolf. And then I myself and Charmaine Lang, a Black woman that I was organizing with Reproductive Justice Collective, which was an organization that was also housed at the organization we were at. And we decided that we were going to begin to lead the org to ensure that where it was currently being housed, that it was going to support the needs that the Black folks at the table wanted it to have. And so we decided to start looking at ways to bring in money to, we knew that it didn't have to just support, the roundtable didn't just have to support work around Milwaukee. We could actually get our own table of work to do. There's so much work, unfortunately, to do in the city of Milwaukee. And so that's what we did. We started to get a little money around violence prevention. And then we started to really begin to put our feet to the ground. And then in 2017, fast forward, I became the director of the African American Roundtable. We got a small budget and began to move that thing. And then there was some discussion and conversation around bringing other staff in. So we ended up hiring an organizer. And then again, more conversation around how can we take this program or a project and create it into an actual organization. Ended up getting a, what's it called? Advisory board to support us with some of that decision making. And in 2020, we became a fiscal project of the Hmong American Women's Association. And there's so much history that I could go more and more into, but it's been an exciting journey to really be able to form and shift this organization into a leadership development organization, an organizing organization, and now becoming a political home for Black people on the far northwest side of Milwaukee. And the values around leadership development, the values around authentic relationships, building slow, trust, moving at the speed of trust in relationships. And the vision, again, is to be a part of the ecosystem and the movement in Milwaukee and beyond to build the type of world that we want to live in and help to make sure that people are being transformed along the way so that we know how to show it once we get there.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Markasa. Thank you so much for that beautiful journey. Maya, I want to bring you in now. Can you share a little bit about the origin story of the Wisconsin Civic Power Table?
Yes, I will share very little bit considering the time that we have. But just know that it was, a tricky situation that I came into. The former table didn't ultimately work out for most of the partners. And so we were in a place where there was a lot of work to be done to rebuild trust among partners and also to rebuild a table that was able to, one, be sustainable and not run into the same issues again. But that was also, really grounded in values and in, the movement issues and I guess, just values that align it with the partners, like the reason we're all together, the reason we align ourselves as a community, as an ecosystem in the state. And so when I started rebuilding the table, my role was to obviously rebuild the functionality of the table, but was also to address the issues that partners had had with the previous version of the table and to rebuild that trust and to also get that input. So at the start of the table, there was a lot of processes that included gathering input from partners, building, thorough, meaningful, real one-on-one relationships with the folks that run these organizations that we get to work with. And ultimately to reestablish the identity of the table with the input of all of these folks who have a stake in it. And so we reestablished it. Our mission is really to provide support and accountability and strategy to our C3 partners in Wisconsin. And we do all of that to build power and to build power that's specifically, collectively owned. Like if we all have buy-in in the creation, we all have buy-in in the ownership and shared ownership over it. And also power that is well organized because our resources are quite finite and we have to use them well and the stakes are high for our people. So we got to do things well. And so really about building a collective and well-organized power is the mission that we set out to do,
It's beautiful, especially really like focused in on what you're building and why. And it's a great transition to you, Angela, who I think, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody across the four corners of Wisconsin who doesn't know about the powerhouse that BLOC is today. But BLOC is so young and it's like, legacy and history. So tell us a little bit about how BLOC came to be.
Yeah, it kind of starts with the 2016 election. We know what happened. On one hand, it was the outcome of the election and that man that was president, unfortunately. But in Milwaukee, I think what was the most frustrating for me was hearing from Dems and progressives, and I use that term loosely, white people that literally wagged their finger in my face and said, if you people would have just voted, we wouldn't be here. And I was like, that was your takeaway from the election, not the 52% of white women that voted for him. We are the problem here. Okay, that's the wrong analysis. And I was lucky enough to be in a position to leverage some national networks, such as the Center for Popular Democracy and For Our Future. And I remember one conversation specifically with you, Jen, at the Ambassador Hotel. And you were like, no, I think we could build like a Black organization in Milwaukee. And people people would support it. And I was like, you think so? Like, nah, for real? And next thing you know, we're all meeting in the AFSCME building, doing kind of like a power day and thinking of what we wanted it to be. And I remember there's two things specifically, is that we wanted it to be Black AF and Milwaukee AF. That was very important for us. We wanted to take all this like toxic transactional nature of electoral politics and kind of disrupt all of that. And so it was actually, Jen was in the room when the BLOC name came to be. We're brainstorming different things and playing around with all the ways that we could do it. And for me, it was about being able to take the lessons learned that people were refusing to actually take as lessons and apply them differently for our community. It's not just this transactional show up a couple weeks or a couple months before an election. It is year round. It's not parachuting in from other cities and other states. It's hiring and developing your own people from the neighborhood that can relate and that understand the challenges and the issues at hand. And so being able to take all the things and do them differently is what we've been able to be successful. And we feel like a more educated and informed base is a more active base, right? The more you know and understand of how to plug in, the more you want to be engaged. And that's why it's really important for us to have a year-round model. We don't just, have a couple people, show up at your house a month before the election. We were able, especially this last year, to keep about 40 ambassadors on between Milwaukee and Racine, continuing knocking on doors, continuing to phone bank into base builds, and just to re-engage around issues. And what has been great is that when we first started, people were skeptical. They were like, you just another one of these organizations. I ain't gonna hear from you again. We were like, no, you gonna get annoyed because we gonna keep blowing up your phone. And we were able to earn, the trust because people saw that we were different. We couldn't just say that we were different. We had to actually prove that. And I think that's why we've been able to be so successful.
I just can't stop smiling, and it gives me so much like hope and joy to know that where my parents live, where my in-laws live, right, that the city that I love is so well taken care of by the leadership of you ladies. So look, I'm just going to keep thanking you for everything you do. Maya, I want to come to you to really like hone in, because you all have built something in an image that I think a lot of us have not seen or hadn't existed, in generations before. One that's rooted in your strength and power as Black women, for sure. But Maya, you're a founder. You're in this startup emergent phase as an organization. You're a first-time executive director, yet you are expected to deliver on some really huge results, right? I feel like when that happens, there can often be this pressure to just chase the money, go after the money, and yet you've somehow remained so grounded in your journey. Tell us more about the values that have grounded you, and how do you stay focused on your plan when everybody's trying to pull your attention into different directions?
Yes, thank you for that question. It is a lot of pressure. So, I think what I'll start with is being realistic, and being real about it, right? Like when it's hard, it's hard. And just recognizing the realities of the field that we work in and the stakes of the work. So I definitely came into the role taking it very seriously, especially because the work that I do oftentimes has the most impact on the people that carry out the work, right? The organizers, the folks that, run organizations that are in constant contact with the community. We serve a lot of really impressive, amazing organizations. And so for me coming into the role, there was a lot of pressure and the stakes were really high because I know what it's like to be an organizer, and especially to be a Black woman organizing in Milwaukee, where you're reminded of how high the stakes are every day in your lived experience and in your work. So, so definitely taking it seriously. And to do that, we really went about rebuilding the table with a lot of intention. And there's, I think, a lot more work than it seems to move with intention. It's one thing to say you're being intentional. It's one thing to say, you know, you want to be strategic. But in reality, that means starting the work on something months before everybody else, right? It means spending hours of time thinking, right? Like we don't, you know, could oftentimes consider the commitments that it takes to do things intentionally. And so when I started this role, I was just very realistic about what it takes to stand in the commitments that are made. And so, you know, one of the values that's really grounded me, especially coming into some tricky relationships as we rebuilt the table, was transformative justice. And I'm really grateful to the many thinkers and scholars and doers in the field of transformative justice, because it's something that's taught me a lot. And one of the things that it's taught me, I think, out of anything, is that it takes so much more time to do things well, right? It takes so much more time to thoughtfully navigate through conflict, to feel your feelings, to make space to think, to make space for people to be human beings and have flaws, right? And so, like, you have to plan for that. Like, you have to have a strategy that incorporates that. And that can be hard, like you said, when like someone's like, well, if you go and do this right now, I'll make it, you know, I'll make it ready for you. But that can be distracting. And so I think, you know, the biggest thing is really not so much what the exact values are themselves, but having a strategy that incorporates all of the time and capacity and skills and people that are needed to truly carry out those values and live those values, more than just claim them or want to achieve them, which is the first step, of course, but you have to put the work in, and I think just be realistic about how much work it takes. So that was kind of, you know, something that was very important to the founding of this organization. And so some of the values that, you know, I brought into the creation of the table were, like I said, transformative justice, really getting input from the stakeholders. So an example of how, you know, that took more work. If you have to give people time to give the feedback, right? I couldn't just say, here's, you know, what I've created. You have 24 hours, and then I'm going to move forward with it. And then I'll send the email at 4 p.m. on Friday. You know, like that's not really getting input from stakeholders. I have to have long periods of feedback time. I had to have one-on-one conversations with people. I had to synthesize feedback. I had to create you know, I had to create tools that would effectively gather the feedback, right? So that kind of work is, you know, an example of what it takes to truly embody, you know, a value that was set. We also really wanted to center people. A lot of the, you know, focus coming into this role was ensuring that the employment practices of this organization were just and respectful to people's dignity. And also just working in this field. This is not a field that's driven by some particular tool or technology. This is a field that's driven by the people who do the work. If we didn't have organizers, if we didn't have volunteers, if we didn't have dope Black women like Angela and Markasa to lead an organization, none of this work would happen without people. And so really being able to center people and their dignity in the work was a really big value. There were also some values that we established or like incorporated in how we do things, right? So like acknowledging that this work is continuous was really important. Ensuring that there was no start or end to the growth or the development or the recalibration that happens in the way that we do this work. Similarly, that we are adaptable, because y'all know how this work goes. You know, what you thought you were getting into ain't never what you got into at the end of the year. So just being realistic about that. And then we also wanted to, you know, make this something that was sustainable. I think that's something that was really important going into it, and also kind of echoes that point of like, putting in the work, to have something that's standing on a sturdy foundation and not just thrown together is really important, to achieving all the other values that we set out to accomplish and embody. But also to the purpose of this organization, to be something that is a pillar in this ecosystem and is able to support the immense and amazing work that partners are doing. And then I think the last value that I really want to uplift that was really important when we were founding this was to be visionary. I think one of the other things that really excited me about the opportunity to rebuild the table was the vision that I have for it and the vision that I have for this field of work. Although we work in progressive movements and we work in a typically what is called a progressive space, we can oftentimes embody the opposite of the world that we are trying to build in a very toxic way. And that's real, and it's not to blame anyone. But when we are existing in a world that is run in through a capitalist economy and that is built upon colonial practices, it's hard to avoid, doing the same things. And so realistically, we have to be intentional about not doing the same thing as we have been doing. We have to be open and welcoming to a different way of even just operating our organizations, right? A different way of HR, a different way of using documents, a different way of communicating with people, like even in the little things that we do on the day-to-day, being able to recognize when we might not be in full alignment with our practices and our values is important. And so the reason that visioning and being visionary is such an important value is because, to do this work in the way that I set out to do it, you really have to vision beyond anything you've ever seen, and be okay with doing things that haven't been done before. And so that was a really important principle and value for the founding of this. And I think for the creation of anything new, even if it is a continuation of, something that already existed or work that's already happening, as we move forward, I think in everything we have to be visionary to see the possibilities beyond, right? Like be open when somebody says you can in fact build a super dope Black organization that is serving Black people and doing right by Black people in Milwaukee, and you think that's totally impossible. But if that's what needs to happen, the vision is the way to make it happen. And so I think just being visionary is probably one of the strongest values for me as well.
Thank you so much, Maya. Markasa, I want to come to you because you also share the values of dignity at work and workers' rights and your commitment to Black liberation. I think were all key factors in your decision to move the African American Roundtable to an independent organization. Can you talk about how those things have guided what you're building and how do they show up in your organization?
It's been a very
questions here.
Right. No, I appreciate the question, and it always is an opportunity for me to think through this again, but also to hear myself and recognize the journey that we've been on, because it's been a journey, right? And so as we sat as a project of an organization that was led by a white woman, we understood that there were opportunities for us to pick up, move, and go create something else. And that was always the vision once we started to build the foundation of something new. And so our time there as Black folks, even as people who are part of the roundtable who were not necessarily staff, of this organization also experienced some of the harm, that was happening within the organization, not even being a part of it as staff. And so when we started to go through some assessments of the organization, there was an opportunity for myself and the other staff person that was working with me, Devin Anderson, to learn some things, to see the things that were being unearthed, but also make a point of reference of this is not what we're going to be up to. This is not what we're going to be up to. Actually, we're going to do it this way. And so it was this journey of learning for us, and also a journey of, like Maya was saying, what is it that we want to build? It doesn't have to look like this. It doesn't have to look like this, but we know we want it to look like this. And it's something that we've never seen or experienced before. And so it's really been a dope opportunity to be connected to such amazing leaders across the country, like Andrea Ritchie. And Andrea Ritchie and a group called Dragonfly Partners put together this amazing toolkit called In It Together. And it talks about, it's a pathway that you can use for creating values. And once we left the organization, we realized that we really need to pause to stop to define our values together. How in the world are we doing this work alongside of each other when it's like one person may have a description or a definition of what this value means, someone may have this, partners don't necessarily know what our values are. And so to really be able to hold folks in their dignity, we have to be aligned and on the same page around some values, and to understand that everybody Black is not going to necessarily hold all of our same values, and that's okay. And that's okay. But can we as an organization really come together to align ourselves around what we are saying our guided values are and what's helping us to hold people in dignity? And so we utilize this amazing toolkit. And we did it over like a year and a half time. We did it alongside of our staff and our board. And it was a beautiful, beautiful process to do. It sparked very, very lively conversations. And we talked about what it looks like to be in practice and what it looks like to be out of practice with some of the values, including accountability, authentic relationships, community. Like there's this everybody, I think, defines community different. And so it's like, what do we mean when we're saying community, dignity, empowerment, liberation? So we have all of these values that we began to define. And then we were able, like I said, to just go back, look at the definitions, and then see, are we aligning ourselves with the things that we said? Is this how we're holding ourselves? Is this how we're holding staff? Is this how we're holding board, partners, members, and other folks that we're working alongside? And also, we're able to use it as a guiding document in regards to how we are in partnership with other people. And one thing that we learned in regards to some of the harm that we've experienced, but also recognizing that some of the harm that we've experienced, we've wielded some harm as well. And, what can we learn from that so we can be better stewards of our time, our energy, and the power that we're building? And so we recognize that there's some things that we have to slow down to do to really understand how we are going to transform ourselves and to really be able to do our intentionality around holding folks in their dignity, seeing people in their dignity, and then also recognizing, again, that not every partner is going to share all of those things. So really being clear and upfront. I just had a conversation today with a partner, a potential partner, and the question was like, do we have this set of questions that we put together in a strategic plan? And I started to ask them, and I said, I need to know some examples. Like, can you spell out, can you show me what that looks like? So when I go back to the staff, I can say, hey, these questions that we set out to ask people, these were the answers. What do we think? Let's make a consensus decision on whether or not we're going to move forward with that, and actually use that as a guidepost. I think actually Maya helped us to develop that partnership document. She's one of our board members, which is super awesome. And so we had to just take some time to slow down and recognize the journey that we had been on, where we had been, what did we want our container and our culture to look like? And then how are we going to get there? We didn't have to just kind of make this stuff up. Again, there's so many amazing tools out there from so many amazing leaders. And so that In It Together toolkit that we used was a very instrumental part in us helping to define our values and really be able to move alongside of each other with a deeper level of trust, as we know the things that we're actually looking to practice and maybe not necessarily to practice, to move away from and to build towards.
Dang, thank you, Markasa. That was a word. That was like the whole word. I love that. It really strikes me that each of you are building and growing your organizations in the context of real tangible harms that none of you were responsible for creating, right? So in a way, what that means is this distrust and this hesitation that, you know, rightfully so many members of the community have been feeling, like each of you had to overcome that, even though it wasn't the result of your own actions, right? Not just overcome it, but you each had to put in the work to heal, right? To help people heal from that past harm as well. And Angela, I can't think of a better example maybe than you here, because, you know, at the time that you were building BLOC, right, you were recovering not just from, you know, one, but from several organizations, including the one that I used to lead, right, having gone by the wayside or having, you know, really exploded, blown up, you know, harmed workers, a whole host of things. And here you are coming back saying, I know that there was this extractive experience that you all just had, but we really can do something different. Can you talk about that process of building trust and how you establish yourself as different from the previous harms?
Yeah, it was it took a while. You had to be very intentional in understanding that that was the dynamic and that's what people were holding. Um we were a part of a organization in the early days, and we still are, and they were like, you should ask for membership dues on doors. Like they wanted us to do it from the jump. And I was like, one, no, because they don't know who we are. Two, add on the history and who we're talking to, right? Like there were people, like there's two types of organizations that kind of like fell by the wayside. Like there's the ones that are set up to leave after the election, whether they tell the community or not, but that's always been the plan. And then there's organizations that unexpectedly something happens, funding, something like that. And um it was one of those things where people weren't getting paid. They didn't get their final check, but these were organizations that, you know, claimed to be working on living wage ordinances, but like weren't paying their people at the end of the day. And like I understand like things happen, but like that was like some real harm, and it wasn't I don't think there were really practices after that to actually relate to the community or to talk to the community about that harm. And I think there was also a lot of like misconceptions and rumors that were flying around of whose fault it was and all of that. And so, you know, you flash forward to, you know, about roughly a year later after some of the organizations fell after the 2016 election. And here we are knocking on doors. And there was a lot of like slam doors in our faces. Like people were like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. You know, we know what happened to these organizations. Or, you know, and it's not even just like Black-led organizations. We've seen Democratic Party, we've seen candidates, you know, in these pop-up organizations, some of which I worked for, that, you know, make these claims and sell you a dream and say, yeah, if we just come together and vote and this and that, and they may tell you things, you know, post-November about organizing or accountability that they have no intention of doing. And so sometimes like the harm comes in a financial way of people just not getting paid, but also we realize that these organizations that had no intention of staying here after the election sell you a pipe dream and they sell you a promise just to get you to vote. And that has also been detrimental. And we've been trying to make the case that the more people do that and people try to do this transactional, we are just coming a couple weeks or a couple months before an election, that's actually burning the turf. Because after a while, people stop opening up their doors. They're like, yeah, whatever. But you have to be consistent and you earn that trust. And it has allowed us to be able to get through the doors instead of somebody saying, hi, I'm, you know, with the Democratic Party or I'm with this campaign. Our people will be like, I'm not trying to hear it. If we say, hey, we're from Black, we haven't seen you in a couple weeks, come in for some lemonade, right? Like it's different because people see us and we've earned their trust in that way because they've seen us in the cold, in the rain. Oh, I saw you talking to my neighbor. I was wondering if you were going to come here too. There's been residents that have said, you know what, I see you more than my alderman. Maybe you should run for alderman. And so it's about building those relationships and making sure that people feel heard. We also start every conversation, whether it's a C3 conversation or a C4 conversation, with what does it look like for the Black community to thrive? And that was also a question in the very beginning that took people back and was like, what do you mean thriving? I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to survive. What are you really getting at? And people were not used to having someone knock on their door at all. And if they're knocking on your door, asking what a thriving neighborhood looks like to you, asking you about your issues. I've been a part of organizations. I was part of the problem where you're knocking on doors and you say, hey, my name is Angela. I'm with this campaign. Boom, boom, boom. Let me run all these talking points down to you. This is why you should join me. It's very much not listening. It is providing your own agenda. And people were used to some of those conversations on doors, especially in an electoral type of way. And so to ask people questions about what their issues are, what they care about the most, people saw that as like, oh, maybe they actually do care. And so we had to be consistent. We had to show up, and people started trusting us as trusted messengers. They were taking our literature into the voting booths with them because they trusted us. I got calls from poll workers saying, your people are leaving behind their literature. And I was like, well, this is a good sign because it shows that they trust us and they're keeping our literature, putting it on the refrigerator and taking it with them to the polls. So it took a long time to do that. But I think the biggest thing was being consistent and making sure that our teams of ambassadors too, they have regular turf that they're responsible for. So, when they're knocking on doors, they're already familiar with that area and people already know them. And so it's not just showing up wherever, they're going and building in these places and they end up becoming resources themselves too.
Thank you, Angela. I could have this conversation all day. I feel like I have so much more to learn from the three of you. But unfortunately, we will have to wrap up, I'm sure. I want to ask one final question, though, because, each of you on this journey, there have been things that have helped you and things that have made it even harder, even though you were already trying to deal and build after a crisis. So I'd love to really ask you, what role can supporters and funders play in helping leaders actually build transformative change inside their organizations after crisis? And Maya, can I come to you first?
Oh, sure. Well, as we wrap up, I'm really grateful for this conversation and the opportunity to be in a community of folks that I admire so much. I think one of the big things that folks can do the work on themselves, right? Like you aren't going to be able to relate to, understand, value a visionary plan if you haven't done the work yourself to undo the thinking that constricts you from relating to, understanding, seeing the value in such a plan. So I think, an important part that all folks, no matter like what your role is in this ecosystem is like to, value self-learning, like value doing the work on yourself, recognizing your areas for growth, whether it's a particular issue, a particular concept, right? Like I would never go to be on the board of the African American Roundtable without a solid understanding of transformative justice, because that is so core to the way that they work and the way that they operate as an organization. I need to have a solid understanding of that concept to be able to support them, right? To be able to have a value and a respect for the plans, right? Like, I don't know, like if you're going to be a good basketball fan, the best basketball fans are the folks who play basketball before, that kind of thing, right? Because they get it. They notice the little, you stepped this way, then that way, like that. It's kind of like that, right? Like you you have to develop some of your own experience with the concepts that you are seeking to support and be involved in. Like you can't, not to say you can, you know, you have to be an expert, but you do have to come ready to learn, right? Like you have to come willing to understand, and you can't come in thinking that your one way of knowing things or your one lived experience is a standard, because it's not, right? Like nobody's one way is a standard. And so we all have a lot of opportunity to learn and a lot of opportunity to unlearn. So, you know, I think the biggest thing folks can do is take advantage of the opportunities that you have to learn more, to expand your understanding, expand your familiarity, especially when it comes to the issue areas or the concepts, values of the groups that you're seeking to work with. And then I think once folks open themselves up to learning more, you kind of will start to recognize how much you don't know, right? Which is I think the catch-22 of it all, right? Like the more you learn, the less you know. Oh, that's kind of giving Plato or something. But, right, like the more you learn, the less you know. But what that does for you in this kind of work is it helps you to be that visionary kind of person. It helps you be open to doing things in a different way and not immediately shut down because something is unfamiliar to you or something isn't following the typical protocol that you might expect. But what you will find is in those moments that you may have originally shut down due to lack of knowledge or lack of understanding, is that's where our opportunity to win is, right? If we continue to shut down the concept of a Black-led, Black-focused, Black AF organization on the north side of Milwaukee, we would have completely missed the opportunity for the work that the African American Roundtable is doing, that BLOC is doing, right? And so if we continue to limit our, you know, if we continue to hold ourselves back from doing that work, we continue to limit our knowledge, which continues to limit our opportunity, right? And so I think one of the biggest things that folks can do is to pay attention to where you can learn, right? And then pay attention to the gaps, to the opportunities. And that's when you'll start to, I think, feel a lot more hopeful, one, which is definitely a plus in this work, but feel a lot more trusting of some of this transformative change, because it can feel super different. Like it can be nerve-wracking, you know, and it can be like hard to convince folks to invest money, right? Like money is a very big thing, and it can be hard to convince folks to invest their money in something they don't understand. But at the end of the day, doing the work to understand is worth it when it comes to this kind of work, especially when we're talking about communities of color and other marginalized communities where the status quo and the way things have been going is definitely not working for us. So we need to be a little less scared of trying to do things differently, because the way things are going might be working for some, but there are so many that they're not working for. And so being open to that takes a lot of learning to get you to the understanding. But once you do that work, I think you'll find that there's a lot of opportunity that you would have otherwise missed.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Angela, can I come to you and ask you the same thing? How can funders support folks who are building after crisis?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. One, especially if they are a Black woman, trust our leadership. I think a lot of times people are like, trust Black women only when it's convenient for you. If you trust us, not just when, you know, it makes sense for you. If we're calling out your problematic fave or you are also the problem, like if we have to trust Black women in all forms if we're actually going to, right? I've seen times where we've propped up Black women in leadership because it seemed like the right thing to do, or it satisfied a DEI type of requirement for their organization, and then we set them up to fail because there's no support. There's no like kind of safety net to support folks. And so what does it look like to actually hold us as we navigate our own crisis, as we navigate some of these things? At the same time, I think something that's important to acknowledge is that as members of the same communities that we do work in, we are expected to lead and to be leaders 24/7, while not assuming that we aren't healing and grieving the same things that our communities are grieving, right? Like we see the videos of the police lynchings and murders, and we're expected to lead in those times while also not being always extended the grace that we are also healing and grieving and full people as well, and not just moving through the motions for the sake of a funder or a rapid response thing that somebody wants. To actually support folks is lifting up and saying our voices and our names in spaces that we aren't in. I know I've had a lot of conversations with funders, and then there's always the question of like, so what's up with y'all C3 table, right? And I'm like, listen, Maya is the homie, support her. Like I've literally like escalated my voice. I was like, support her. Like, do not let her down. Like, and I was going back to what we were saying earlier is like, you can't just, be like, oh, we're going to put a Black woman here, it's 20 something or 2022 or whatever. And we got to make sure we're doing it and not actually providing that support. So I remember having conversations with specific funders and I was like, no, she's great. I view her like a little sister, and like I swear I'd be like bullying people and I'm making sure that you're supported, because I knew the situation you walked into, Maya, and I didn't want it to be this Black woman to have to clean up after a white woman, right? And I know what that feeling is like, and I was very honest with folks that if we are going to make sure that Maya is successful, like we about to do that unconditionally, and that also means giving us grace and allowing for mistakes. I'm gonna be honest, white people get to mess up all the time, specifically white men, and then a lot of them get promoted. They mess up and get promoted somehow, right? People of color, and specifically Black women, we are not afforded that grace. And I know I feel that every day, and feeling that there's always a microscope on BLOC in the work that we do. And if we aren't doing it right, somebody's going to try and come after us. It's almost like a higher unfair standard that I think a lot of us are familiar with. And so what does it look like to allow for those mistakes and that grace and opportunities for us to learn? White men can create organizations, run them into the ground and be like, oh, well, we tried. Okay. And there's like no consequence. And I remember when I took this job, I worked for another organization and I almost didn't take this job because I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could handle it. And then there was all these different conditions of like safety nets that were put in place for me. So I was like, okay, that's the only reason I felt comfortable stepping into an ED role when I had no experience, is because there was a built-in safety net that allowed me to learn through mistakes and be able to grow as well. And I recognize that that's not something everybody always has. And I'm very lucky that I was able to have that. But I think it's being able, it's far overdue to not just say that we're supporting Black folks and Black leadership. We actually need to back it up with dollars and support, and not just because it's the flavor of the month and it's the right thing to do to not look racist, right? Like we need to actually authentically support folks and give people that space to grow and to learn and to be supported too.
Markasa, I'm gonna ask you to bring us home. What do our listeners need to know about how we support leaders after crisis?
Yeah, well, at the roundtable, we say veggie back. So I'm going to bounce backwards and veggie back to what Maya said, and then come back to Angela. Along with this thing around like learning and transforming, that means to also practice what you're learning. Let's stop being information junkies. Let's stop grabbing all of this knowledge. Let's stop going to all the workshops. Let's stop going and doing all of the reading and being in the book clubs, and then not putting anything to practice and not being in community, to practice this alongside people. And so I would say that along with that deep learning, the deep understanding of what you need to unlearn, to also then practice what it is that you want to see out in the world, and do it alongside other people, and ask for accountability. Be in accountability. Be ready to be in accountability pods, squads, whatever you want to call them, so that there's opportunities for when you do mess up, because we all will, then to ensure that you are going back and correcting it, whether again, someone's calling you in, bringing you in about it. And then, yes, to drive the conversation all the way home with where Angela was kind of wrapping up, is that you can't expect for Black leaders, Black organizations, and even for us doing the transformative work and our self-learning to do this without the dollars. We must have infrastructure dollars, general operating dollars to do the work with not any strings attached. And then you have to come to this meeting. And then you have to turn over backwards. And then you have to wear your socks. I don't want to do any of those things. I just want you to give us the money so that we can take care of the things that we know that we need to take care of. And that is to build sound leaders with sound infrastructure, with sound money. And I'm not talking about, just like 1 year, like multi-year, because the work that we do is hard to do and it takes time. Transformation does not happen overnight. I am 45 years old. I didn't just learn to be here last year. I have been learning and unlearning for quite some time now, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to arrive next month because I went to a training and I actually started to practice in community. And now I feel like I got to know, like Angela said, like we need space to learn and grow and to mess up, and to try it and experiment again and experiment something else and experiment something else. So the patience around experiments, the patience around growing organizations at a slow pace, because like Angela said, our people in our community are dealing with all types of things. And then we're expected to come and sit at the computer for the Zoom meeting to talk about the thing that we are also grieving, to talk about, our staff is grieving. No, actually, I'm still grieving as well. But here I am showing up because I know that I need to be in this space with this funder, or I need to be in this space to do X, Y, and Z, trying to meet a thing but I actually don't have the capacity to meet. So recognizing the slow pace, the patience that is needed, the dollars that are needed to support building that type of infrastructure, that type of culture, and those type of people, so that we can actually do the work to not only transform ourselves, help to transform our staff, transform the culture and the communities around us, transforming families, transforming the greater equals. There's time that needs to be taken, and to do it, it's not free. It's not free to do it. We need to call in amazing people like Jen to say, hey, Jen, can you come in and help me to transform these oil leaders? Can you come in to teach this class, to train us to do this thing? It takes time and it takes dollars to do it.
Well, you heard it here, folks. If you take nothing else from this, please take these two things. Trust Black women and give them the resources and get out of their way. They can handle all the rest. Maya, Markasa, Angela, thank you so much for sharing your powerful stories of resilience and leadership. Thank you for the visions that you are creating. And to our listeners, now is the moment, now is the time that we don't just allow Black women to lead after crisis, but instead we allow them to create the sustainable, resilient, powerful organizations, fully resourced and fully actualized. Now is the moment. Thank you all so much.